Throughout the ages, there have been great empires and civilizations that have risen up, their creators ruling nations, regions, and continents for hundreds, even thousands of years. Some of the great legacies and accomplishments of these empires may be lost in the mists of time, but from what they have left behind in rock and ruin, we can trace remarkable stories.
In the centre of Amsterdam, in Dam Square, lies the National Palace, an imposing building that has been here for 4 centuries. And inside is a huge gilded reception hall, and on its marble floor a series of maps of a new world. A world discovered by generations of Dutch explorers and traders.
You have this economic miracle that just explodes in the 1590s, 1600s.
After a bloody war against Spain, which would last 80 years, the newly independent Netherlands had emerged into the 17th century. Soon its trade, science, navy, and art were the most acclaimed in the world.
It was something the Dutch became famous or infamous across Europe for, that they tolerated people of all beliefs.
It became known as the Dutch Golden Age. It transformed the Netherlands into the foremost maritime and economic superpower.
They took what others did and they did them better. It's not a wealth that takes the form of grand palaces. It wasn't a noble-dominated or even a princely-dominated society.
How did the Dutch miracle come about? And why did a small, new, independent nation with few natural resources become the 17th century's superpower? In the first half of the 16th century, this man, Charles I, the King of Spain, was the most powerful man in Europe. But Charles I was also the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. A product of dynastic intermarriage focused on extending the European ambitions of the Catholic Hapsburg dynasty, Charles was actually born in Belgium and would spend half his life here.
That's something that tied the people of the Low Countries to him in a personal bond, which they didn't share later on with his son, Phillip II. That was part of the alienation that developed later. He, though, was the one, not his son, who began the very repressive religious policies, which did result, I mean, before the revolt even, in more than, or about 1,000 people being executed for being Protestant heretics, which per capita was far and away the highest rate of persecution in all of Europe.
Charles was the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs who had sent Columbus on his journeys of discovery. In addition to Spain's vast overseas empire formed on the back of Columbus's discovery of the Americas, Charles now found himself ruling over vast swathes of Europe, including southern Italy, Austria, and the Low Countries of today's Netherlands and Belgium. But the Holy Roman Empire was also a Catholic empire, still guided by and in the grip of the Inquisition. Throughout the 16th century, Northern Europe was in the grip of the Reformation, convulsed by the religious teachings of Martin Luther and his followers. Here in the Low Countries, the conflict was particularly fierce.
The first 2 martyrs of the Protestant Reformation were Dutch. They were 2 Augustinian monks in Brussels.
The port of Antwerp today remains one of the biggest in the world, ranking 2nd in Europe and within the top 20 globally. The city is also known for its diamond industry and trade. It is on the River Scheldt, linked to the North Sea by the river's Westerschelde estuary. It's about 40 kilometres north of Brussels and about 15 kilometres south of the Dutch border. After the silting up of the Sven and the consequent decline of Bruges in the 15th century, the city of Antwerp grew in importance.
Antwerp was the commercial capital of Europe. Some people might even say the world. It was a place within the Netherlands where all the strands came together.
At the end of the 15th century, the foreign trading houses were transferred from Bruges to Antwerp. The Bourse of Antwerp, originally built in 1531 and rebuilt in 1872, was the world's first purpose-built commodity exchange. Moneylenders and financiers developed a large business trading commodities and lending money all over Europe. Antwerp became the centre of the entire international economy, the richest city in Europe at this time. Antwerp's golden age is tightly linked to the age of exploration. During the first half of the 16th century, Portuguese ships would unload their cargo and trade them for textiles and metal goods.
The French brought wine. Most English exports at the time were woolen cloth, and they all went through Antwerp. You name it, it all came together there.
Antwerp became the sugar capital of Europe, importing the raw commodity from Portuguese and Spanish plantations on both sides of the Atlantic, refining it and shipping it on. It's estimated that the port of Antwerp was earning the Spanish crown 7 times more revenue than it earned for the Spanish colonization of the Americas. The city attracted merchants and traders from the Venetian and Genoan republics, and with its policy of tolerance, a large number of Jewish migrants from Spain and Portugal. Antwerp experienced 3 booms during its golden age. The first based on the pepper market, a second launched by the American silver coming from Seville, and a third boom based on the textiles industry. At the beginning of the 16th century, Antwerp accounted for 40% of world trade. Nowadays, Belgians celebrate this pivotal moment in their history. The annual Ommegang Festival commemorates the visit of Charles V to Brussels in 1549. Onlookers marvel at acrobat stilt walkers and the magnificent period costumes following the festival to the dramatic square in front of Brussels Town Hall. But during the 16th century, the northern part of the Spanish-ruled Netherlands had become increasingly Protestant, specifically Calvinist, while the larger part, comprising the 10 southern provinces, including Antwerp, remained primarily Catholic. Charles's son, Philip II, also a devout Catholic, assumed the throne in 1560 at the end of Charles's half-century-long reign. He was not easily going to forget his father's legacy or the important role of the Low Countries in the giant Spanish Empire.
Philip II, in particular, was quite determined not to rule over heretics. He felt it contrary to his Christian duty to allow heresy. It wasn't just Protestant versus Catholic. Those who were Catholic and loyal to the old church were often very kind of old-style Catholics or Renaissance Catholics. What they weren't was the kind of militant reformist Catholic that Philip II in particular was.
Charles V had been relatively tolerant of this growing Protestant movement, but when this became a call for independence from Spain, it unleashed a long period of conflict, which became known as the 80 Years' War.
It was law that you had a right to be tried by the magistrates of your own city. The magistrates weren't going to condemn you to be executed, and Philip wanted you executed, so he took that jurisdiction out of the hands of the locals. He would not willingly rule over heretics. He felt duty-bound to suppress Protestantism for the sake of his own soul and also his care for the souls of his subjects.
Philip's behaviour upset the local elites and nobles, among them this man, William the Silent, a moderate who was to play a key role in the Dutch revolt.
He was trusted. He was part of the system. He was the highest noble of the Low Countries, the only one who was also a prince in his own right of the Principality of Orange.
This was an era of high religious drama characterized by persecution, even torture, of those thought to be witches. The conflict erupted into open revolt when Philip tried to abolish all Protestantism. A wave of violent riots in 1566 spreads rapidly throughout the Low Countries.
It all amounted to the introduction of what they called the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition. And Philip insisted on it.
This is Antwerp's cathedral, which was attacked during what became known as the Iconoclastic Fury in 1566. Beeldenstorm in Dutch means image storm or statue storm, the term used for destruction of religious images in Catholic churches and cathedrals. Catholic art and many forms of church fittings and decoration were destroyed in mob actions by Calvinist Protestant crowds. Similar outbreaks had taken place as part of the Protestant Reformation earlier in the century in other parts of Europe. After the Iconoclastic Fury, Spanish authorities moved to regain control of the Low Countries. Today, this historic church stands lost and forlorn in a large sunken ditch in the middle of the port of Antwerp. It's registered as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Bizarrely, this was the site of the most notable event of this period, the Battle of Oosterweel, in which Spanish forces destroyed an army of Dutch Calvinists. Some see the battle here as the start of the 80 Years' War. A Spanish mercenary army surprised a band of rebels and killed or captured almost all of them. Hundreds died, and rebel leaders, including William the Silent, fled. Now, King Philip II sent in Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, the third Duke of Alba, as Governor-General of the Spanish Netherlands. In 1568, Alba got to work and established a special court called the Council of Troubles, nicknamed the Council of Blood. Its reign of terror saw it condemn thousands of people to death. The historic centre of Antwerp, known as the Groot Market, was almost totally destroyed and was subsequently and painstakingly put back together after Spanish soldiers sacked the city, massacring 7,000 citizens and burning down 800 houses. The devastation triggered Antwerp's decline. Trade with Spain was disrupted and merchants and traders relocated to Amsterdam. William the Silent became the leader of the rebels, and in 1579, the northern provinces, roughly today's Netherlands, announced they were breaking from the Spanish crown by signing the Union of Utrecht.
It was a very clever strategy on the part of the Hapsburgs to blame William of Orange for the revolt. Now, he played a very big, important role in the revolt, but that role has subsequently been exaggerated, in fact, by both sides. The Dutch, in retrospect, crowned him practically and called him father of the fatherland, the new country that came into being in the northern provinces. And the Habsburgs and Catholics more generally accused him of being responsible for the revolt and for the tragedy that ensued and the loss of all those provinces for the Habsburgs. And if he hadn't been assassinated in 1584, it might have ended up being greater than it was.
William was declared an outlaw by Philip II. In 1580, a bounty was placed on his head. Delft today is a pleasant Dutch town most famous for the imitation pottery it produced after Dutch traders became leading European importers of prized Chinese porcelain. It's also famous for being the home of Vermeer, the famous Dutch artist from the Golden Age. But in 1580, it also became the refuge of William the Silent, now a fugitive. It was here at the Prinsenhof, an urban palace built in the Middle Ages as a monastery, that he was gunned down in the world's first handgun assassination. The holes in the wall from gunshots are still visible. Traditionally, members of the Nassau family were buried in Breda, but as that city was under Spanish control when William was assassinated, he was buried here in the new church in Delft. Since then, most of the members of the House of Orange, including all Dutch monarchs, have been buried here too. They were called stadtholders.
Which originally meant that you were, as it were, the representative of the king and acting on behalf of the king. But they retained that office even after they no longer had a king. And that person came from the lineage of William of Orange and played the role of kind of substitute for a prince with limited authority.
Despite its impressive stained glass windows, Delft's new church sets a tone that would become common to many Dutch churches. Devoid of lavish decoration, the interiors are almost austere. After the assassination of William, the division between North and South deepened. The arrival of large numbers of troops from Spain began a campaign of reconquest. The Spanish captured many rebel towns in the south: Maastricht, Tournai, Oudenaarde, Dunkirk, Bruges and Ghent. Then, in 1585, a siege of Antwerp was launched. This key city had changed hands several times over the previous 20 years. The city was still held by the Dutch, and they needed to resupply it along the River Siege, its lifeline to the sea on which its trade depended. Along the vast banks of the river stand two forts that played a pivotal role in the siege. On the northern side of the river was Fort Liefdenshoek, which was controlled by the Dutch forces. It faced, on the southern side of the river, Fort Lillo, controlled by the Spanish. The Spanish were encircling the city on this southern side.
The Dutch sought to send commodities, goods, military weapons through the Scheldt River into Antwerp, so that Antwerp could resist the Spanish Hapsburg armies that were sort of circulating the city.
As the Dutch were trying to resupply the city along the river, the Spanish erected a bridge of ships in a strategic position so as to cut off the supply lines. The Dutch sailed fire ships called hellburners against the bridge of ships, but the Spanish line across the river held.
So the Spanish had a keen interest in trying to block the Scheldt River. The Scheldt River is crucial to Antwerp, and if you block the river, you probably are able to secure the city at some point, right? They couldn't survive without having access to the sea. And the Spanish army succeeded in that. So in 1585, Antwerp surrenders and the Spanish armies enter, and Antwerp becomes a Spanish Habsburg possession again, and would remain so for the following 2 centuries.
After the Spanish retook Antwerp, the Protestant leadership approached other Protestant rulers in Europe, including England's Elizabeth I, for an alliance, even offering them an effective takeover of the new republic.
They had already offered sovereignty practically to the brother of the King of France, who turned it down. They offered it to the King of France, Henry III, wouldn't take it. They offered it to Elizabeth of England, wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, because of course it was a poisoned chalice. To mix metaphors, it came with the eternal enmity of the most powerful ruler of Europe, with the biggest army and the most financial resources, namely Philip of Spain. So she wouldn't accept that offer either.
After the surrender of Antwerp, Protestant citizens moved north. The coastal provinces of Holland and Zeeland had been important hubs of the European maritime trade network for centuries before Spanish rule. Now they would become even more so for the newly independent Dutch Republic.
They were a low-lying country with very few of their own natural resources, so they had to bring in a whole lot of raw materials from elsewhere. And of course the most important thing are foodstuffs, and in the case of a maritime country, naval stores. And so the Dutch from an early period were able to master the trades of the Baltic. The North Sea Baltic is in a sense a system. It's a trading system, and geography gives the Dutch that special position with good navigation into the Baltic. So they draw enormous quantities of, on the whole, cheap, bulky goods to sustain their economy.
If you import grain, then your own land, Holland, doesn't have to grow its own grain, and it can devote its economic energies to more profitable enterprises than just subsistence agriculture. And that had developed already as early as the 15th century. Holland was one of the, if not the first places to no longer be self-subsistent. Lumber, that enabled it to build ships cheaply, more cheaply than anywhere else, and to build a large, economically profitable shipping sector.
Many of those moving north settled here in Amsterdam. Once a small port, it would by 1630 become one of the most important ports and commercial centres in the world.
When Antwerp fell, when it was taken by, or retaken I should say, by the Hapsburg army, Protestants there were given 4 years to sell up, as it were, and leave before they would have had to conform to Catholicism if they wanted to remain. The city's population was almost halved in an enormous exodus in the course of the 1580s. They were the ones with the personal commercial connections and the know-how to conduct business, trade, with the Mediterranean, the Levant, as the Middle East was called, with the Spanish colonies and Portuguese colonies as well.
There were also significant influxes of non-native refugees who previously fled from religious persecution, particularly the Sephardi Jews from Portugal and Spain. The Portuguese synagogue, also known as the Esnoga or Snoga, is a late 17th century Sephardic synagogue in Amsterdam, completed in 1675. Esnoga is the word for synagogue in Ladino, the traditional Judeo-Spanish language of Sephardic Jews. The Amsterdam Sephardic community was one of the largest and richest Jewish communities in Europe during the Dutch Golden Age, and this very large synagogue reflected this.
They were not overtly Jewish. They were what were called conversos. That is, they came from the Iberian Peninsula. They had Jewish ancestry. Long ago, before 1492, who had sooner or later been forcibly converted. So from that point on, they were Christian, sometimes very sincerely so, sometimes they were would-be Jews. They brought their Iberian connections to the economic miracle, and as they found it safe, came out more openly as Jews. They, by the 1630s, were able to practice Judaism entirely openly.
They take their business with them, they take their capital, and a whole lot of artists too, and skilled craftsmen also migrate to Amsterdam. So Amsterdam receives, in a sense, a huge sort of bonus, really. It receives this windfall, really, of merchant capital and skills, particularly, shifting northwards.
The Dutch soon developed a huge shipping industry, Europe's biggest.
We're talking about many tens of thousands of ships that were built and maintained by the Dutch in the 17th century. And they were used not just for the Dutch economy, but also to transport goods from, say, France to other Mediterranean areas. So the Dutch also became a sort of a transport company you could hire in other parts of Europe as well.
The Dutch share of European shipping tonnage was enormous, well over half during the first half of the 17th century.
They were able to offer the lowest shipping costs in the world, certainly in Europe. Ships that were relatively, that required small crews.
A Floyd was a revolutionary cargo vessel. Unlike rivals, it was not built for conversion in wartime into a warship. It was cheaper to build and carried twice the cargo and could be handled by a smaller crew. The pear-shaped vessel had a large cargo bay near the waterline and a relatively narrow deck above, in part to avoid taxes based on the size of the craft's deck. The Floyd design completely eliminated its armaments to maximize cargo space. Another advantage was a shallow draft, allowing the vessel to bring cargo in and out of ports where other vessels could not reach. The Floyd was square-rigged with 2 or 3 masts, which were much higher than other galleons to allow for greater speed. And national industries such as shipyards and sugar refineries expanded. Windmills like these at Kinderdijk ensured more and more land was utilised, partially through transforming lakes into polders.
Well, windmills had always played an important role in the Netherlands because, after all, large areas of the country are below sea level, and you need windmills to drain the land that's below sea level. So it was sort of a multi-purpose machine that was used in a variety of industries. We know from travelers' accounts that the landscape surrounding Amsterdam, particularly the north of Amsterdam, was packed with windmills in the 17th century. It really was a sort of an industrial zone. Images we have look quite modern in the sense that it looks as in sort of a large industrial estate.
Cheap energy was produced by these windmills from peat, which was easily transported by canal to the cities.
Long before the English started burning coal to drive the engines of the Industrial Revolution, the Dutch were burning peat to produce heat for industrial processes.
The invention of the wind-powered sawmill enabled the construction of a massive fleet of ships for worldwide trading and for military defense of the new republic's economic interests. Unlike the Kinderdijk windmills, the windmills at Zandse weren't used for draining water. This was a gigantic industrial area with thousands of windmills sawing wood from Scandinavia and making paper. There are still 16 windmills left here.
These are my working hands. Yeah. We do everything in the windmill by hand. So, beginning every day, every morning, I climb upstairs, I look where the wind is. If I pull on that big wheel by hand, I transport 15,000 kilo because that's the weight of the head of the windmill, included the weak system. And every morning, that's my training. Yeah, 1700, we also did it by hand. Yeah.
De Cat, meaning the cat, was built in 1664. And even now it produces paints and pigments of high quality. These are supplied to artists and restorers across the world. The mill also produces chalk, pigments and oils. When you enter the mill, the entire building vibrates with the milling. The primal strength of this building offers a hint as to why the mill has been in existence for such a long time.
They were on the cutting edge of a variety of technological developments that made their industries and economic enterprises more efficient and profitable than anyone else's. But then they also had this kind of social organization and savvy. And of course, they were the ones who developed the first, what's often called the first modern corporation, the East India Company.
In the 1590s, Dutch ships began to trade with Brazil and the Dutch Gold Coast of Africa, and then headed towards the Indian Ocean and the source of the lucrative spice trade. This building was once the headquarters of the Dutch East India Company, which would become a 17th century equivalent of a giant multinational corporation. In 1594, the Compagnie van Ver, Company of Far Lands, had been founded with the aim of sending 2 fleets to the Spice Islands. These voyages led to a number of companies competing for the trade. So, in 1602, the Dutch East India Company, VOC, was founded, financed by shares, which led to the establishment of the first modern stock exchange. The company received a Dutch monopoly on Asian trade, which it would keep for 2 centuries. In this room, the men who ran the company would gather to make decisions on the giant trading network they had established. The room has been recreated in its original form, with replicas of the exact paintings and maps featured on its walls. The company was given the legal authority to establish fortresses and strongholds, to sign treaties, to enlist both an army and a navy, and to wage defensive war. Spices were imported in bulk and brought huge profits due to the efforts and risks involved, and a seemingly insatiable demand.
They developed forms of commercial organization that allowed more people from these broad middling stratums to buy in, to participate, to buy a share, literally, in an enterprise, which didn't have to be a grand, big thing. It could be a ship for a voyage. But they spread the risk, and they spread the profits that way, too. So limited liability partnership. I mean, forms of social and economic organization are just as important as any kind of technological innovation, which they were very good at, too, and came up with lots of. And all of that requires a kind of legal infrastructure, private property being protected, commercial instruments that were enforceable in courts. So, for instance, they had notaries. The Bank of Exchange that was established in Amsterdam in 1609 was the first safe place that merchants with vast wealth could, put their deposits without fear that it was going to be confiscated by, say, a prince who's gone bankrupt and is in desperate need of funds. But the deposits in the Bank of Exchange in Amsterdam were guaranteed by the Amsterdam government. And the Amsterdam government was good for to its word and good for its money, and it itself consisted of extremely wealthy merchants whose interests were tied up in the success of the bank. And so that meant as well that the governments, being run by commercial interests, could also borrow money at very favorable interest rates, which was one of the secrets to Dutch success in the war against the Spanish. Meant that they could fund their army reliably, consistently, and they could afford a whole lot of troops. Philip II's economic base was a lot more precarious, even though Spain was, at the beginning of the revolt, far and away the mightiest country in Europe, with far and away the biggest empire. There were fundamental weaknesses and dependencies, and so every time Philip went bankrupt, the Dutch succeeded. And Philip, over those years, especially in those key precarious early ones, was fighting several wars at the same time. He was fighting the Dutch, he was fighting the Ottoman Turks in the Mediterranean. He had restive Morisco subjects, would-be or indeed practicing Muslims on the Iberian Peninsula, and at times he was at war with France as well.
Amsterdam, capital of the Netherlands today, has more than 100 kilometers of canals, about 90 islands, and 1,500 bridges.
In the middle of the 16th century, it had fewer than 30,000 inhabitants. By the middle of the 17th century, it had roughly 200,000. So it had to lay out whole new parts of the city, and that included the semicircle of 3 grand canals that surround the medieval center.
if you build a city that is at or below sea level, you need canals to get rid of the water, right? So that's a very practical reason. But you can also use the waterways to transport goods, commodities, for example, and in a way it also makes for a more pleasant city.
If you've got canals, then you can bring in goods on the canals much more easily than by moving things along bad roads, muddy roads and the like. So a lot of different places used water transport if they could. The Dutch really developed it to a fine art.
This canal ring has been listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, contributing to Amsterdam's fame as the Venice of the North. The three main canals, Herengracht, Prinsengracht and Keizersgracht, form concentric belts around the city. From about 1660, the canals were extended and the city formed its iconic crescent shape. It made the city grow to 4 times its size and gave it the most intricate and efficient system of navigable waterways in the world. A maze of connecting canals brought merchandise to the doorstep of every canal-side merchant. A fleet of thousands of small barges carried the goods from the big ships in the harbour to every corner of the city. More than 1,000 warehouses on the canal sides were supplied by these man-powered barges. Alongside the main canals are 1,550 monumental buildings. These houses served as both homes and workplaces. The basement floors of many canal houses include large doors used as entranceways to the shop or for storage. If you look up, you will see many of the gables are adorned with a hook, not a decoration. The hook is there to enable residents to pull large, bulky objects up and into a window.
The historic heart of Amsterdam is to a large extent still standing as it was in the Golden Age. And what form does it take? Houses. The houses of these merchants. And they'll find thousands and thousands of houses that belonged to this wealthy mercantile class that developed on the back of Amsterdam's commercial hegemony across Europe and extending around the world.
As trade wealth grew, these canal-side homes would become grander. This is Trippenhuis. It was built by the Tripp brothers, arms traders. It is currently the seat of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences. Rembrandt's famous painting, The Night Watch, once hung here, and the building retains many original features, including its painted ceilings. Church art was virtually non-existent in the newly independent Dutch Republic. In the south, where Catholic Spain still controlled what is modern-day Belgium, artists such as Peter Paul Rubens remained in demand, producing extraordinary religious works for Europe's Catholic aristocracy. A statue of Rubens remains today outside Antwerp's giant cathedral, while inside, 2 of his extraordinary signature works are featured in the centre of this vast church. But in the Dutch Republic, the clergy held little worldly influence. The Roman Catholic Church had been more or less suppressed since the onset of the 80 Years' War with Spain. Wealth and social status belonged almost exclusively to Protestants. Today, the best-known painters of the Dutch Golden Age are the period's most dominant figure, Rembrandt, the Delft master, Johannes Vermeer, and Frans Hals, who infused new life into portraiture.
Well, this was a fantastic time to be an artist, because previously in other centuries and other places, to make a living as an artist, you needed patronage, you needed commissions from the church, from royalty, from nobility. Whereas in the Dutch Republic, for the first time, you could produce art for the open market, knowing that people would buy it, because at the same time we're seeing this emergence of this new middle class who are cultivated and cultured and are eager to buy art for their own homes.
They had a very comfortable lifestyle for the bourgeoisie. They had a lot of freedoms, politically speaking, that perhaps they hadn't had before. And of course, it's when we associate the great artists, the Dutch artists, appearing and being able to sell to this enriched bourgeoisie.
There's an interesting paradox in Calvinism. Calvinists are taught to believe that, riches are not necessarily a good thing. It really depends on how you deal with them. But to live austere, to live a sober life, to live a simple life, is basically pleasing God. The paradox is this, that almost the ideology or the theology that Calvinists develop, working very hard, living austere, make the most of your talents, results in spectacular commercial successes. So the Calvinists want to live an austere life, but they become incredibly rich. But they're also very embarrassed about this.
A growing number of wealthy Dutch middle class and successful mercantile patrons were the driving forces in the popularity of the group portrait. The large group portrait, especially of civic and militia guilds, such as Rembrandt van Rijn's Night Watch, were especially popular.
The Militia Company of District 2, which is more commonly known by its nickname, the Night Watch, shows one of the civic guards in Amsterdam. It was created for their headquarters. It's very interesting because these civic militias were both there to protect against enemy invasion, but they were also there for civil disorder. So they were essentially the army, fire brigade and police all rolled into one. But they were also important social networking organisations, and to be in a civic guard really connoted that you'd made it in society. To be in a portrait like the Night Watch was a huge privilege, and you would pay the artist according to the position that you got. So the people who are front and centre, you're paying slightly more to have more of your face compared to the people at the back. It's all about status, it's all about display of wealth, and I think that's one of the really interesting ways that it reflects society.
Social status was largely determined by income. The landed nobility had relatively little importance. It was the urban merchant class that dominated Dutch society. Where rich aristocrats often became patrons of art in other countries, this role was played by wealthy merchants. Golden Age art also included a great number of depictions of daily life. As the Dutch explored the globe, reaping its treasures, map-making, celebrating newfound knowledge, became an art form as well.
I think these maps and globes really represent this interest in Dutch trade, Dutch travel. This is the great age of travel and exploration, and it's only natural that that would be reflected in these paintings, be it through objects collected from around the world, be it through maps and navigational charts. These are paintings that celebrate the strengths of Dutch society in this period.
Pictures that highlighted the sources of trade and naval power that marked the Republic's golden age were also sought after.
Water is such an important part of the Dutch psyche. The sea itself is such an important source of trade and industry, from fishing to shipbuilding. And we know that the canals and waterways were also important sources of transport and communication. So a painting like this would really appeal to a member of that mercantile class. This is what Holland was built on. It's exactly the type of thing that they would have in their house. So Van der Velde, who painted a calm, specialised solely in ship painting. So the idea that you could make your career of ship painting is really something that could only happen in Holland. And that was what he did, and that was also what his father did. So this is a family of painters who just specialise in painting ships. And what really makes their paintings great is that these are real portraits of ships. You know, they depict them right down to the rigging, and they're so accurate.
Landscape painting also became very popular.
People could afford what elsewhere in Europe they couldn't. And people had decorations on their walls. They did buy paintings, and artists responded to the existence of this huge domestic market by producing things that were affordable. Landscapes were, for the most part, fairly cheap paintings. They were not nearly as expensive as paintings of biblical scenes, say, or scenes from Greek and Roman mythology. And so they were within the reach of your middling sort of burgher.
The Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam holds many of the treasures from this era of boom and eventually bust, symbolised by the work of great master artists such as Rembrandt. His masterpiece, The Night Watch, now hanging here, remains one of the defining works from the age. A special genre at this time was also of still life. This style of ornate still life painting was developed in the 1640s in Antwerp and emphasised abundance by depicting a diversity of objects, fruits, flowers and dead game, often together with living people and animals. The style was soon adopted by artists from the Dutch Republic.
The Flower Still Life by Jan van Huysum is really interesting because the Dutch were obsessed with flowers in the 17th century, and I think still until today. It captures all these different flowers which don't grow at the same time of year, aren't in bloom at the same time, but for a moment they're preserved in one vase, and it's beautiful. But a flower still life like that would not be possible without trade and the empire, because it's because of the Dutch East India Company that all these new specimens of flower, of tulip, are being brought from across the world back into Holland.
Leiden was the birthplace of Rembrandt, and he lived here for the first 25 years of his life. It's also famous for its windmill, one of the oldest in the Netherlands, dating back to 1723. It was working until 50 years ago. Leiden was at the centre of tulip mania, which gripped the Netherlands during the Golden Age. Its botanical gardens are the oldest in the Netherlands, and it was here Carolus Clausius cultivated the first tulips from a single bulb brought here from Ottoman Turkey. It's also where Frans von Siebold brought more than 700 unknown plants as Dutch traders reached out around the world. Dutch ships would transport the naturalists dispatched by the plant hunter Linnaeus to collect samples from across the globe. The University of Leiden here attracted freethinkers and intellectuals from across Europe.
If you think of the greatest philosophers of the 17th century, probably they would be Descartes, who was French but who lived more than 2 decades in the Dutch Republic, John Locke, who spent a few years there when things weren't safe here in England, and Spinoza, who was Jewish and born in Amsterdam and from the Amsterdam Jewish community, and ultimately a dissenter from that community. But you didn't have to belong to the official church of the Dutch Republic. You didn't have to belong to any church or any synagogue either. Because people had freedom of conscience, it meant that they were going to be left alone based on what they thought and what they believed.
Again, due to the Dutch climate of tolerance, book publishers flourished. Many books on religion, philosophy and science that might have been deemed controversial abroad were printed in the Netherlands and secretly exported to other countries. The Dutch Republic became Europe's printing house.
If you want to write an atheist tract in France or in England, that would be very hard. You could indeed be persecuted, or the books could be confiscated, or you could be imprisoned. In the Netherlands, it's not necessarily different, so it really depends where you publish the book. but you will always find a way. So there's a huge clandestine and almost illegal book publishing industry. And if you're discovered, if the printer is discovered, you just go to another city and print it there, and you hope that the authorities will be a little bit more lenient.
The Dutch Republic that emerged in those northern provinces as an independent country had an official church. It was Calvinist, but everybody in the country enjoyed under the law freedom of conscience. And that was a founding principle of the Republic, freedom of conscience. Now, what does that mean? At a minimum, it means you're not going to be subject to some inquisition where people ask you what you believe and potentially prosecute you for what you believe or what you might say or what you might read or how you might sing. It became part of the image of the Dutch. It became also a point of national identity, a distinguishing feature in the eyes of the Dutch themselves.
All this was made possible in the 17th century by an incredible maritime trading empire that had not only brought so much wealth to cities like Amsterdam, but had enabled spices, sugar, and exotic fruits to be consumed on the dinner table.
No country had previously dominated the world economy the way the Dutch did. For 50 to 75 years, this tiny country dominated the European and, by extension, much of the world economy. An extraordinary thing for a country with very small land size and very small population.
In Amsterdam harbour today, you can visit a replica of the Amsterdam, an 18th century cargo ship of the Dutch East India Company, used as a transport between the Dutch Republic and its settlements and strongholds in the Dutch East Indies. The ship is moored next to the headquarters of the Admiralty, from where many of these lucrative journeys would depart and return.
What is a golden age? A golden age is when everything's going right, when there's synchronicity and there's a mutual reinforcing of different things going right. And so different sectors of the economy have to, in the first place, reinforce one another. Agriculture, commerce, finance, industry, all working with one another and building on one another's successes and dependent on one another. But it's not just an economic phenomenon. Without the wealth, though, how are you going to have the cultural efflorescence? Where's the market going to be? Who are going to be the buyers of the cultural goods produced unless there's sufficient wealth and sufficiently widely distributed? One of the characteristic features of the Dutch was relative dispersal and relative equality when it comes to wealth. It's all relative, but it had a very broad middling stratum.
Next time, we explore the reach of the Dutch Empire, its battles with the Portuguese, its deep links with the slave trade, its eclipse by their rivals, the British, and how the Dutch reflect on their golden age today.